He doesn't belong here, and he knows it." The whisper sliced through the recycled air of the first-class cabin, loud enough for everyone to hear, yet quiet enough to be deniable. In seat 1A, leather throne costing more than a mid-sized sedan, sat 18-year-old Caleb Washington. He wore a faded gray hoodie, scuffed sneakers, and an expression of pure terror. Looming over him was Brenda Miller, a senior flight attendant with a smile that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. She wasn't just checking a boarding pass, she was hunting prey. She thought she was clearing out the trash. She had no idea she was about to start a war with the man who owned the sky. The early morning sun glared off the tarmac at JFK International Airport, casting long, harsh shadows across the terminal windows. Flight 404, the flagship route for Stratton Airways destined for Zurich, was boarding. This wasn't just a flight, it was a social climbing event. The first-class cabin was a sanctuary of cream-colored leather, walnut wood trim, and the soft, polite clinking of crystal champagne flutes. Caleb Washington clutched the straps of his backpack until his knuckles turned ashen. He stepped onto the plush navy carpet of the aircraft, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was 18, black, and dressed in the only comfortable clothes he owned, a charcoal hoodie with a frayed hem and a pair of Jordans that had seen better days. He checked the digital pass on his cracked iPhone screen again. Seat 1A. It had to be a mistake. It felt like a setup. As he moved past the galley, the smell of expensive perfume and fresh coffee hit him. The flight attendants were already stationed, standing like sentinels in their pristine navy and gold uniforms. Brenda Miller, the purser for the flight, stood near the cockpit door. She was a woman in her late 40s who wore her authority like a weapon. Her hair was pulled back into a bun so tight it pulled at the corners of her eyes, giving her a permanent look of skepticism. She had been flying for Stratton for 20 years, and she prided herself on her ability to profile trouble before it even took a seat. When Caleb stepped into the first-class cabin, Brenda's eyes snapped to him. She didn't see a passenger. She saw an anomaly. She scanned him from top to bottom, the hoodie, the backpack, the hesitation. "Excuse me," Brenda said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweetness that masked the venom underneath. She stepped into the aisle, effectively blocking his path. "Economy boarding is through the second door, sweetheart. You've taken a wrong turn." Caleb stopped, swallowing hard. "Oh, no. I'm in this cabin." He tried to step around her, but Brenda didn't budge. A smirk tugged at the corner of her red-painted lips. She glanced at her colleague Roger, a younger attendant who was arranging magazines. Roger looked up, saw Caleb, and let out a short, scoffing chuckle. "This cabin?" Brenda repeated, her volume raising just enough to draw the attention of the other passengers. "Honey, this is first class. The seats back there in 34B are perfectly fine, but you can't just walk through here to look at the rich folks." In seat 2B, a man in a bespoke Italian suit lowered his Financial Times. He adjusted his rimless glasses and stared at Caleb with open disdain. "Is there a problem, Brenda? We're trying to get settled." "Just a minor confusion, Mr. Henderson," Brenda assured him, flashing a dazzling smile before turning her icy gaze back to Caleb. "This young man seems to be lost." "I'm not lost," Caleb said, his voice quiet but firm. He held up his phone. "I have a ticket." Seat 1A, Brenda snatched the phone from his hand before he could protest. She held it away from him, squinting at the screen as if it were contaminated. She looked at the QR code, then at the name, and finally back at Caleb. "Caleb Washington," she read aloud, making the name sound like an accusation. "And you expect me to believe you bought a $12,000 ticket? Whose card did you steal, kid?" Caleb felt the heat rising in his cheeks. "I didn't steal anything. It was bought for me." "Bought for you," Roger chimed in, leaning against the galley wall with his arms crossed. "By who? The Tooth Fairy?" Laughter rippled through the cabin. Mr. Henderson in 2B chuckled, shaking his head. "A woman in 1B, draped in a cashmere shawl, sighed loudly. "Can we please remove the riffraff? I have a connection in Zurich I cannot miss." Brenda handed the phone back to Caleb, wiping her hand on her skirt. "Look, I don't have time for pranks. The app glitches sometimes, or maybe you photoshopped this. But you are not sitting in 1A. That seat is reserved for our VIPs. Now turn around, head back to row 30, and maybe I won't call airport security to have you escorted off for fraud." Caleb stood his ground, though his legs felt like jelly. "Scan it," he said. "Just scan the code." Brenda stared at him for a long, tense moment. The air in the cabin was thick with judgment. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the black teenager in the hoodie daring to challenge the gatekeeper. "Fine," Brenda hissed. "I'll scan it. And when it flashes red, you're going to jail." The scanner beeped. It was a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the low hum of the auxiliary power unit. Brenda looked at her handheld device. The screen didn't flash red. It flashed a solid, undeniable green. "Passenger, Washington, Caleb. Seat 1A. Status boarded." Brandy blinked. She tapped the screen, thinking it was frozen. She refreshed the manifest. The result was the same. The system was accepting him. "This is ridiculous," Brenda muttered. She looked up at Caleb, who was waiting with his hand out for his phone. She didn't get it back. Instead, she looked at Roger. "Roger, check the main computer. The handheld is malfunctioning. It's saying he's actually in 1A. Roger rolled his eyes and tapped on the galley touchscreen. After a few seconds, he frowned. "It's on here too, Brenda. Caleb Washington, 1A. Full fare paid." For a second, silence reigned. Caleb felt a tiny spark of relief. "Can I sit down now?" he asked, reaching for his phone. Brenda pulled the phone back, her eyes narrowing. She wasn't defeated. She was just changing tactics. She let out a sharp, incredulous laugh sound that was meant to humiliate. "Oh, I see what's happening," Brenda said, her voice loud and theatrical. She turned to address the cabin, treating the passengers like an audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears we have a little computer error today. Or perhaps a hacker in our midst." She turned back to Caleb, leaning in close, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You think you're smart, don't you? You hacked the airline app, or did you find some loophole? You think because the computer says green that you belong here?" "I didn't hack anything," Caleb protested, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm the programmer, yeah, but I didn't hack this. I'm supposed to be here. A programmer." Brenda shouted, throwing her head back in laughter. "Did you hear that, Mr. Henderson? The boy in the hoodie is a programmer. I suppose he invented the internet, too." Mr. Henderson laughed dryly. "Probably programmed a stolen credit card, more likely." Brenda shook her head, a look of pitying disgust on her face. "Listen, kid, I don't know how you did it, and quite frankly, I don't care. But Stratton Airways has a dress code and a conduct policy for first class. You are making the other guests uncomfortable. Your hygiene, well, let's just say it's not up to standard for this cabin." Caleb looked down at his clothes. He had showered that morning. His clothes were clean, just old. "My hygiene is fine," he stammered. "It's visual pollution," Brenda snapped. She snapped her fingers at Roger. "Roger, get his bag. We're moving him to the back. If he wants to fly, he flies in the jump seat near the lavatory, or he doesn't fly at all." "You can't do that," Caleb said, panic rising. "I have a ticket. I can do whatever I want," Brenda said, stepping closer, invading his personal space. "I am the purser. On this plane I am God. And I say you don't fit the aesthetic. Now move, or I will have the marshals drag you off, and I'll make sure you're banned from every airline in the Alliance." She grabbed his arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her fingernails digging into the fabric of his hoodie. "Get your hands off me." Caleb pulled back, stumbling slightly into the armrest of seat 1A. "Assault!" Brenda shrieked immediately, recoiling as if he had punched her. He just assaulted me. Roger, call the captain. Call security. The cabin erupted. Mrs. Halloway in 1B gasped, clutching her pearls. He pushed her. I saw it. Is violent. Caleb stood frozen, his hands raised in surrender. I didn't touch her. She grabbed me. Brenda smoothed her uniform, a look of triumphant malice in her eyes. She had him now. It didn't matter what the ticket said. Once assault was on the table, the black kid in the hoodie was finished. You're done, Brenda spat at him. Get your trash and get off my plane. Go. She pointed a manicured finger toward the exit door. Caleb looked around the cabin, pleading with his eyes for anyone to speak up, but the faces staring back were walls of indifference and hostility. They wanted him gone so they could drink their champagne in peace. Caleb picked up his backpack. Defeat tasted like bile in his throat. He had worked so hard for this opportunity, and it was being stripped away by a woman who hated him simply for existing in her space. He took a step toward the door. Then a deep, resonant voice boomed from the entryway behind him. Is there a problem here, Brenda? The voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that instantly silenced the cabin. It was the kind of voice that was used to giving orders that moved millions of dollars. Brenda froze, her face, previously flushed with the thrill of power, drained of color. She knew that voice. Every crew member at Stratton Airways knew that voice, though few had ever heard it in person. She turned slowly. Standing in the entryway of the aircraft was a man who seemed to block out the sun. He was tall, well over 6 feet, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than the entire first-class cabin's combined wardrobe. He had silver fox hair, sharp, predatory eyes, and a jawline that looked like it was carved from granite. It was Preston Sterling. Preston Sterling wasn't just a passenger. He was the founder of Sterling Tech, a venture capital titan, and more importantly, he was the chairman of the board for Stratton Airways. He was the man who signed the checks. He was the man who owned the planes. Behind him stood 2 personal assistants and a nervous-looking gate agent. Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Mr. Sterling, she stammered, her voice trembling. We weren't expecting you. I mean, the manifest. We didn't know. I booked late, Preston said, stepping onto the plane. The air in the cabin shifted instantly. The snooty passengers who had been sneering at Caleb suddenly sat up straighter, fixing their ties and checking their makeup. Mr. Henderson in 2B looked like he was about to faint from excitement. Preston didn't look at them. His steel-gray eyes were fixed on the scene in the aisle. He looked at Brenda, then at Roger, and finally his gaze landed on Caleb. Caleb was still clutching his backpack, standing awkwardly in the middle of the aisle looking ready to bolt. I asked a question, Preston said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously quiet. Is there a problem? Why is my guest standing in the aisle with his bag? The silence that followed was deafening. Brenda's eyes widened to the size of saucers. She looked from Preston to Caleb, and the realization hit her like a physical blow. The blood rushed from her head. Your guest? Brenda squeaked. Preston walked forward, ignoring Brenda entirely. He stopped in front of Caleb. The intimidating scowl vanished, replaced by a look of genuine concern and respect. He extended a hand to the teenager. Caleb, Preston said warmly, I apologize for the delay. Traffic on the lie flat from Manhattan was a nightmare. I hope you haven't been waiting long. Caleb, still in shock, shook the billionaire's hand. No, sir. Mr. Price. Sterling. I just got on. Good, Preston said. He turned back to Brenda. The warmth vanished instantly. His face was a mask of cold fury. Now, Brenda, explain to me why you were shouting at Mr. Mather, Washington, and why did I hear the word assault as I was walking down the jet bridge? Brenda was shaking, visibly shaking. Sir, there was a misunderstanding. I didn't know who he was. He didn't fit the profile. The computer was acting up and he was aggressive. Aggressive? Preston raised an eyebrow. He looked at Caleb. "Were you aggressive, Caleb?" "No, sir," Caleb said, finding his voice. "She told me my ticket was fake. Then she said I was a hacker. Then she tried to drag me off the plane because she said I was visual pollution and didn't fit the aesthetic." Preston's head snapped toward Brenda. Visual pollution. Brenda backed up until she hit the bulkhead. "I didn't say that. I meant..." And then Caleb continued, the adrenaline giving him courage. "She grabbed my arm. When I pulled away, she screamed that I assaulted her and told Roger to call the police." Preston looked at Roger. "Is that true?" Roger, realizing the ship was sinking and he didn't want to drown with the captain, swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. That's what happened. She initiated the contact." "Traitor, traitor," Brenda hissed at Roger. Preston held up a hand. "Enough. Nah. Scott. He turned to the rest of the cabin. "Did anyone else witness this assault?" The passengers were silent. They knew better than to lie to Preston Sterling. But Mrs. Halloway in 1B, realizing she had bet on the wrong horse, tried to backtrack. "Well, it was all very confusing, Mr. Sterling. From my angle, it looked like a scuffle, but perhaps the stewardess was a bit overzealous." Preston let out a dry, humorless laugh. He turned back to Brenda, stepping into her personal space just as she had done to Caleb. "Do you know why Caleb is on this flight, Brenda?" Preston asked softly. "No, sir," she whispered. "Caleb Washington is the lead intern for my new cybersecurity division," Preston announced, his voice carrying to the back of the cabin. "Last week, a server farm in Zurich, the one that handles the logistics for this very airline, suffered a catastrophic code failure. Their engineers couldn't fix it. My engineers couldn't fix it." He placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "This 18-year-old fixed it remotely in 3 hours from his bedroom in Queens. I am flying him to Zurich personally to oversee the system reboot and to offer him a full scholarship and a contract. He's the most important person on this plane. Without him, Stratton Airways doesn't fly tomorrow." Preston leaned in closer to Brenda, his eyes boring into hers. "And you just tried to throw him off for wearing a hoodie." Brenda was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. "Mr. Sterling, please. I've been with the company for 20 years. It was a mistake. I was just trying to protect the cabin." "You were protecting your prejudice," Preston corrected her. "You saw a young black man and assumed he was a criminal. You humiliated him. You lied about him assaulting you." Preston pulled out his phone. He didn't call security. He dialed a number and put it on speaker. "Yes, Mr. Sterling." A voice answered. It was the CEO of Stratton Airways, Arthur P. Stratton himself. "Arthur," Preston said, never taking his eyes off Brenda. "I'm on flight 404. I need you to trigger the emergency personnel protocol." "Is everything all right, Preston?" "No. We have a crew member who needs to be removed immediately. Purser Brenda Miller. She is to be terminated for cause, harassment, racial profiling, and filing a false report against a VIP passenger." "And Arthur?" "Yes. Ensure she is blacklisted. I don't want her serving peanuts on a bus, let alone flying for us. Consider it done. We'll send a gate agent to escort her off now." Preston hung up. Brenda collapsed into the jump seat, sobbing hysterically. "You can't do this. My pension." "My life. You did this to yourself," Preston said coldly. "Now, get off my plane." The cabin was silent as the gate agents escorted a sobbing Brenda Miller off the aircraft. Her pristine uniform was rumpled, a mascara smeared into a raccoon-like mask of despair. As she passed seat 1A, she didn't look at Caleb. She couldn't. The shame was a physical weight pressing her head down when the cabin door finally hissed shut, sealing the outside world away. The atmosphere in first class underwent a radical transformation. The air, previously thick with judgment, was now heavy with a terrified sort of deference. Preston Sterling took his seat in 2A, directly behind Caleb. He didn't sit in 1A. He insisted Caleb keep the captain's chair. "Buckle up, Caleb," Preston said, his voice calm and authoritative. "The champagne list is excellent. Though given you're 18, I've taken the liberty of ordering you the sparkling cider. It's imported from Normandy." Caleb fastened his seatbelt, his hands still trembling slightly. He looked around. The change in the other passengers was almost comical. Mrs. Hathing-Halloway in 1B, who had minutes ago clutched her pearls in fear of him, now leaned over the aisle with a desperate, shaky smile. "So," she began, her voice cracking. "Cybersecurity, how fascinating. My grandson is good with computers. Perhaps you know him. He plays that Minecraft." Caleb looked at her, seeing the fear in her eyes. She wasn't making conversation, she was pleading for absolution. She knew Preston Sterling could ban her from the airline with a snap of his fingers. "I don't play much Minecraft, Mom," Caleb said quietly. "I mostly code in Python and C++. "Oh, wonderful. Simply wonderful," she babbled, turning back to her window, clearly having no idea what he said. Across the aisle in 2B, Mr. Henderson, the man in the bespoke Italian suit who had laughed at Caleb, was acting strange. He wasn't trying to apologize. In fact, he looked paler than Brenda had. He was sweating, dabbing his forehead with a silk handkerchief. He kept glancing at Preston, then at Caleb, then nervously tapping his fingers on the armrest. The plane taxied and took off, thrusting them into the clouds. As the seatbelt sign chimed off, the service began. But unlike the chilly reception at boarding, the remaining flight attendants treated Caleb like royalty. "Hot towel, Mr. Washington." "More cider, Mr. Washington." "Would you like the lobster thermidor or the Wagyu beef, Mr. Washington?" It was overwhelming. Caleb sat in the lap of luxury, eating food that cost more than his mother's monthly rent, yet he couldn't relax. He felt like an imposter in a golden cage. He turned around in his seat to face Preston. "Mr. Sterling?" "Call me Preston, Caleb. We're colleagues now." "Preston, why did you do that? You didn't have to come on the plane. You could have just called." Preston wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. "I didn't come on the plane to save you, Caleb. I was always scheduled to be on this flight. But I intervened because talent is rare, but integrity is rarer. You stood your ground, you didn't scream, you didn't get violent. You presented facts. That's the mark of a leader." Preston took a sip of water, his eyes darkening. "Besides, I have zero tolerance for bullies. Brenda was a symptom of a rot in my company culture. You helped me cut it out, but—" Preston lowered his voice, leaning forward between the seats. "Keep your guard up. We aren't in Zurich yet." "What do you mean?" "The server crash in Zurich wasn't natural," Preston murmured, so only Caleb could hear. "Systems like ours don't just fail violently. Someone pushed them. I'm flying you out there not just to fix it, but to find the fingerprints of whoever broke it." Caleb's eyes widened. "You think it was a hack?" "I think it was sabotage, and I have a feeling the person responsible is closer than we think." As if on cue, the lights in the cabin flickered. It wasn't a standard dimming. It was a strobe-like stasm. The in-flight entertainment screens in front of every passenger suddenly went black, then flashed static. The plane lurched, not from turbulence but a mechanical yaw, as if the autopilot had hiccuped. Gasps erupted throughout the cabin. Mrs. Halloway shrieked. "Ladies and gentlemen," the pilot's voice came over the intercom, sounding strained. "We are experiencing a minor technical anomaly with the cabin management system. Please remain seated." Mr. Henderson in 2B dropped his glass of scotch. It shattered, soaking the expensive carpet. "It's happening," he muttered. "It's too early. It wasn't supposed to be now." Caleb heard him. The screens flashed again. This time, text appeared. Not a movie menu, but scrolling lines of raw code. Red code. Caleb recognized it instantly. "It's a worm," Caleb said, unbuckling his seatbelt. It's jumping the air gap from the entertainment system to the avionics. Sit down, kid, Henderson yelled, his voice bordering on hysteria. Don't touch anything. Preston looked at Caleb. Can you stop it? I need access, Caleb said, his programmer brain taking over. The fear was gone. This was just logic now. I need to plug into the local server. Is there a port? Maintenance hatch underneath the galley screen, Preston barked. He stood up, blocking the aisle so the flight attendants wouldn't stop Caleb. Go. Do what you do. Caleb grabbed his laptop from his backpack. He sprinted to the galley. The flight attendants looked ready to tackle him, but Preston's voice boomed out. Let him work. That is an order from the chairman. Caleb ripped open the maintenance panel. He found the Ethernet port and jacked in. His fingers flew across his keyboard, terminal windows opening in a blur. Come on, Caleb whispered. The code on the screens was aggressive. It was rewriting the flight path data. It was trying to shut down the engines. Who writes a virus to crash a plane? Caleb thought, horrified. This wasn't a prank. This was murder. He saw the source IP. It was internal. It was coming from a device inside the cabin. Caleb executed a counter-script, a sandbox protocol he had written for the competition that caught Preston's eye. He trapped the virus, isolating it in a virtual box, and severed the connection to the avionics. The screens went black. Then the Stratton Airways logo appeared. Calm blue. The lights stabilized. The plane leveled out. Caleb slumped against the galley wall, sweat dripping down his nose. Ladies and gentlemen, the pilot said, sounding relieved. Systems are back to normal. We apologize for the scare. Caleb walked back to his seat. The cabin was deadly silent. They all stared at the boy in the hoodie. This time, there was no judgment. Only awe. Preston nodded at him. A look of grim satisfaction. But Caleb wasn't looking at Preston. He was looking at Mr. Henderson in 2B. Henderson was shaking violently, shoving a smartphone deep into his jacket pocket. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. Caleb sat down and leaned toward Preston. The virus came from inside the plane, Caleb whispered, and I know exactly which seat triggered it. The rest of the flight was a blur of tension. Caleb didn't sleep. He spent the remaining 6 hours monitoring the network traffic on his laptop, ensuring the prisoner virus didn't escape. When the wheels touched down on the wet runway in Zurich, the relief in the cabin was palpable. But for Caleb and Preston, the work was just beginning. As the plane taxied to the gate, Preston stood up. He buttoned his jacket. Stay close to me, Caleb. And don't say a word to anyone until I tell you. The jet bridge connected, the door opened, but instead of letting passengers off, 2 Swiss federal police officers boarded, followed by a tall, stern woman in a dark suit. Nobody moves, the woman said. Her accent was German, precise and clipping. Mr. Parr, the sign. Henderson jumped up. This is an outrage. I have a meeting at the bank in an hour. I demand to let off. The woman ignored him. She walked straight to Preston. Sterling, we received your message from the air. Director Weber, Preston greeted her. Thank you for coming. I believe we have a corporate spy and a saboteur on board. The passengers gasped. Mrs. Holloway looked like she might faint for the second time that day. Who? Henderson shouted, sweat pouring down his face. It's the kid, isn't it? The hacker. I told you he was dangerous. He almost crashed the plane. Preston turned slowly to face Henderson. The look on his face could have frozen the sun. Caleb saved the plane, Arthur, Preston said. You, on the other hand, tried to short-sell it into the ground. Arthur? Arthur, Caleb frowned. I thought his name was Mr. Henderson. That is Arthur Henderson, Preston explained, his voice dripping with disgust. Former CFO of our competitor, and currently a hedge fund manager who placed a $200 million put option against Stratton Airways stock yesterday. A bet that would only pay out if our stock crashed. Say due to a massive system failure or an aviation disaster. Endress's face went white. You have no proof. This is slander. I'll sue you for everything you have. I have the logs. Caleb stepped forward, holding up his laptop. I traced the packet injection. The virus was deployed via a Bluetooth bridge from a mobile device paired to C2B. Device ID, our iPhone 15 Pro. Caleb turned the laptop screen around. It showed the undeniable digital trail leading straight to Henderson's phone. You executed the script when the plane hit cruising altitude, Caleb said, his voice steady. You thought the glitch would just force an emergency landing, tanking the stock price so you could cash in. But you didn't know the virus was buggy. If it almost killed us, Henderson lunged. It was a desperate, animalistic move. He scrambled over the center console, reaching for Caleb's laptop, intending to smash the evidence. Give me that, Henderson shrieked. But he never reached Caleb. Preston Sterling moved with the speed of a man half his age. He caught Henderson by the throat and slammed him back into C2B. The force of the impact knocked the wind out of the hedge fund manager. You are done, Preston snarled, his face inches from Henderson's. You targeted my company, you endangered my people, and you insulted my guest. The Swiss police moved in, hauling Henderson out of the seat. They cuffed his hands behind his back. Arthur Henderson, Director Weber said. You are under arrest for industrial espionage, cyber-terrorism, and attempted manslaughter. As they dragged him down the aisle, Henderson kicked and screamed. It was just business. It was just a trade. You can't do this to me. I'm rich. Preston straightened his tie, smoothing out the wrinkles. He looked at the stunned cabin. My apologies for the delay, everyone, Preston said calmly. Please, enjoy your time in Zurich. He turned to Caleb and smiled. Ready to go to work, Mr. Washington? Not. Although. Caleb zipped up his backpack, ready. They walked off the plane, leaving the stunned silence of the first-class cabin behind them. But the story wasn't over. As they walked through the terminal, Caleb saw a familiar face sitting in the holding area, flanked by airport security. It was Brenda. She was waiting for a return flight economy class back to the U.S. She looked up and saw them. She saw Caleb walking side by side with Preston Sterling, flanked by Swiss police like a head of state. She saw the respect the billionaire gave the teenager. Caleb slowed down. He looked at Brenda. He didn't smirk. He didn't laugh. He just looked at her with a calm, pitying gaze. Brenda opened her mouth to say something, maybe to beg, maybe to apologize, but the words died in her throat. She realized finally how small she was. Come on, Caleb, Preston said gently. We have a server to reboot. Yeah, Caleb said, turning away from Brenda for the last time. Let's go. But Zurich held one more surprise. As they exited customs and entered the arrival hall, a swarm of paparazzi was waiting. Not for a movie star, but for Preston. Mr. Sterling. Is it true the airline was hacked? Mr. Sterling. Who is the young man? Preston stopped. He put a hand on Caleb's shoulder and faced the cameras. This, Preston announced to the world, is Caleb Washington, the new Chief Technology Officer of Sterling Aviation. Caleb's jaw dropped. Chief? What? I thought I was an intern. Preston winked. You saved the plane, kid. I think you earned a promotion. Oh. Job to my son. The transition from passenger in seat 1A to Chief Technology Officer was not a smooth glide. It was a vertical takeoff into a Category 5 hurricane. Zurich was not like New York. It was a city of aggressive precision. The air was colder, the streets were cleaner, and the silence was heavier. The headquarters of Sterling Aviation sat on the edge of Lake Zurich like a fortress of glass and steel, a monument to old money and modern power. Caleb Washington stepped out of the black limousine, the gravel crunching beneath his new dress shoes. Preston had insisted on a detour to a boutique in the terminal before they left the airport, replacing Caleb's frayed hoodie with a charcoal Italian suit that cost more than Caleb's mother made in 3 months. The fabric felt strange against his skin, too smooth, too light. It felt like a costume. But when he caught his reflection in the glass doors of the lobby, he didn't look like a kid playing dress-up. He looked like armor. "Chin up," Preston said, walking beside him, his stride eating up the marble floor. "They're going to smell fear. Don't give them a whiff." They took a private elevator to the top floor of the war room. When the doors slid open, the wall of noise hit them. It was a chaotic symphony of ringing phones, shouting voices, and the frantic clicking of keyboards. The room was packed with 30 of the world's most expensive network engineers and cybersecurity analysts. These were men and women with PhDs from MIT, Zurich Poly, and Stanford. They were tired, they were sweating, and the coffee cups piled on the mahogany table suggested they hadn't slept in 48 hours. When Preston Sterling walked in, the room went silent. Then 30 pairs of eyes shifted to Caleb. There was no warmth in those stares. There was confusion, followed quickly by skepticism. They saw a black teenager in a suit that was slightly too broad in the shoulders, holding a laptop covered in anime stickers. "Ladies and gentlemen," Preston announced, his voice cutting through the stale air, "we have a solution." A man near the front stood up. This was Hoffman, the lead systems architect. He was a giant of a man with thick glasses and a beard that was graying at the edges. He looked at Caleb, then back at Preston, a vein pulsing in his temple. "Mr. Piwitz Sterling," Hoffman said, his German accent thick with exhaustion and irritation. "With all due respect, we are in a crisis. The global logistics server is hemorrhaging data. We have planes grounded in Tokyo, London, and Dubai. We do not have time for a bring-your-child-to-work day." A few engineers snickered. Caleb felt the heat rise in his neck, the familiar sting of being underestimated. Preston didn't smile. He walked to the head of the table and sat down, gesturing for Caleb to stand at the whiteboard. "This child," Preston said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "fixed the airborne anomaly on Flight 404 in 3 minutes using a laptop and a maintenance hatch. You and your team have been trying to patch the ground server for 3 days, and all you've managed to do is crash the payroll system. I'd shut up and listen if I were you, Hoffman." Hoffman's mouth snapped shut. He crossed his arms, leaning back with a look of aggressive patience. "Fine. The floor is yours, young man." Caleb walked to the front of the room. His hands were shaking. He placed them flat on the cold conference table to steady them. He looked up at the main screen. It was displaying the server architecture, a sprawling, complex web of nodes and data streams that looked like a digital nervous system in the middle of a seizure. Red warning lights were flashing everywhere. Caleb took a deep breath. He closed his eyes for a second, blocking out the suits, the judgment, and the fear. He just looked at the code. "The problem isn't the architecture," Caleb said softly. "Speak up," Hoffman barked. Caleb opened his eyes. The fear was gone. He was in the Matrix now. "I said the problem isn't the architecture," Caleb repeated, his voice stronger, echoing off the glass walls. "You guys are trying to patch the firewall because you think it's a brute force attack from the outside. You're treating the symptoms." He plugged his laptop into the main console. "But it's not an attack. It's a hemorrhage." Caleb's fingers began to fly across the keyboard. Terminal windows popped up on the massive main screen, scrolling faster than the eye could follow. "The virus that hit the plane was a trigger," Caleb explained, working as he spoke. "It sent a signal back to this server. It told the system that the admin moved. It rewrote the root permissions. Look here." He pointed to a line of code buried deep in the subdirectory. Line 4042. "If user admin redirect null." It's a logic loop. The system thinks it doesn't exist, so it's deleting itself to protect the data. It's a suicide protocol from the 28 merger legacy code. Hoffman stood up, squinting at the screen. That is impossible. We scrubbed the legacy code years ago. You missed a spot, Caleb said. Specifically a backdoor left by the original developer. It's a ghost door, and someone just knocked on it. Caleb didn't wait for permission. He initiated a command. He didn't try to fight the virus. He simply changed the definition of the admin. He rewrote the permission hierarchy, isolating the suicide protocol in a digital sandbox, trapping it before it could eat any more data. Compiling now, Caleb muttered. The room held its breath. The red lights on the screen flickered. Then, one by one, they turned green. Tokyo, online. London, online. Dubai, online. The hum of the servers in the next room seemed to change pitch, settling into a smooth, rhythmic purr. Caleb hit enter one last time, locking the new protocol with an encryption key he had designed himself in his bedroom in Queens. System secure, Caleb said, stepping back from the keyboard. For 10 seconds there was absolute silence. It was the silence of a paradigm shift. Then Hoffman began to clap. It started slow, almost reluctant, but then he stood up. The other engineers followed. Within moments the room was erupting in applause. It wasn't polite applause, it was the relieved, thunderous cheering of professionals who knew they had just witnessed genius. Hoffman walked up to Caleb. The arrogance was gone. He extended a large, calloused hand. I apologize, Mr. Washington. I have not seen coding like that since, well, ever. You are a wizard. Caleb shook his hand, a small, tired smile breaking through. Just a programmer, sir. Just a programmer. Later that night, Caleb stood in the center of the penthouse suite at the Dolder Grand Hotel. The room was larger than his entire apartment building back home. There was a chandelier made of Swarovski crystals, a balcony overlooking the Alps, and a fruit basket that probably cost $50. He felt lonely. The adrenaline had crashed, leaving him exhausted. He sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, loosening his tie. He pulled out his phone. It was 3 a.m. in Zurich, which meant it was 9 p.m. in New York. He dialed the number he knew by heart. Hello? The voice was thick with fatigue. He could hear the background noise of the diner, the clatter of dishes, the sizzle of the grill, the low murmur of customers. His mother was still on her shift. Baby, she asked, worry instantly sharpening her tone. You okay? Why are you calling so late? Is everything all right? Caleb felt a lump form in his throat. He looked at the crystal chandelier. He looked at the contract lying on the nightstand, a contract with a starting salary that had so many zeros he had to count them twice. I'm safe, Ma, Caleb whispered. I'm in Zurich. I'm at a hotel. That's good, baby. That's good. Did you eat? I can send you a little money if you need. No, Ma. Caleb cut her off, a tear slipping down his cheek. You don't need to send me money. Listen to me. He took a breath. I fixed the computers, Ma. Mr. Sterling. He gave me a job. A real job. That's nice, Caleb. An internship. That'll look good on your resume. No, Ma. No, Ma. Not an internship. I'm the chief technology officer. They gave me a signing bonus. He paused. I wired it to your account just now. Check your app. Caleb, I'm working. I can't be checking my phone, Ma. Please check the app. There was a silence on the line. He heard the rustle of her apron, the tap of the screen. Then a gasp, a sound so sharp it sounded like she had been punched. Caleb. Ah, her voice was trembling. Caleb, is this a mistake? This says, oh my God, it's not a mistake, Caleb said, crying freely now. It's ours. I want you to take off your apron, Ma. What? What? Take off the apron. Put down the tray. Tell the manager you quit. You are never waiting another table in your life. You hear me? Never again. On the other end of the line, he heard the sound of a tray crashing to the floor. Then the sound of his mother weeping deep, soul-shaking sobs of relief that echoed through the phone line. bridging the ocean between a diner in Queens and a penthouse in Zurich. "My boy," she sobbed. "My beautiful, brilliant boy." Caleb wiped his eyes and looked out at the lights of the city. He had won. He had saved the plane, saved the company, and saved his mother. But he wasn't done. The victory wouldn't be complete until the people who had tried to stop him paid the price. Karma does not arrive by appointment. It does not knock politely. When it finally comes, it kicks down the front door and repossesses everything you thought you owned. 6 months had passed since the incident on Flight 404. For the world, the news cycle had spun forward, consuming new scandals and celebrities. But for the people who had been in that first-class cabin, time had not moved on. It had solidified into a heavy, unyielding reality. It was a Tuesday night in New Jersey, raining a cold, miserable drizzle that turned the highway into a slick ribbon of gray. Brenda Miller sat in a glass box on the side of the turnpike, shivering despite the space heater rattling at her feet. She wasn't wearing the pristine navy and gold uniform of Stratton Airways anymore. There was no silk scarf around her neck, no wings pinned to her chest. Instead, she wore a high-visibility yellow vest over a coarse gray fleece that smelled faintly of stale tobacco and exhaust fumes. She was a toll booth operator. Shift 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. A luxury SUV pulled up to the window. The driver, a young man in a suit, didn't even look at her. He just held out a credit card, tapping it impatiently against the glass while talking on his Bluetooth headset. "Yeah, just some delay at the toll," the man said, his voice muffled by the glass. "They really need to automate this trash. It's so inefficient." Brenda took the card, her hands trembling slightly. Her manicured nails were gone, bitten down to the quick. Her skin, once glowing from expensive facials, looked sallow under the harsh fluorescent buzzing above her head. She processed the payment and handed the card back. "Have a safe drive," she whispered, the words automatic, hollow. The man didn't respond. He just rolled up the window and sped off, his tires splashing dirty water onto the side of her booth. Brenda slumped back on her stool. This was her life now. After Preston Sterling had made that call, the aviation industry didn't just fire her. They erased her. She had applied to Delta, United, even the budget airlines that flew exclusively to holiday resorts. The answer was always the same: a polite computerized rejection email or a phone call that ended abruptly the moment they ran her background check. Gross misconduct was a brand on her file, glowing hotter than a scarlet letter. Her pension was frozen, tied up in litigation she couldn't afford. Her savings had evaporated paying rent on an apartment she could no longer maintain. The isolation was absolute. The other toll workers didn't talk to her. They knew she used to be high class, used to fly to Paris and Tokyo, and they sensed the bitterness radiating off her like heat. At 6:30 a.m., Brenda returned to her small, damp apartment. The mail on the floor was a pile of white envelopes with red, urgent stamps. Final notice. Past due. Eviction warning. She stepped over them, too tired to care, and collapsed onto her lumpy sofa. She picked up the remote and clicked on the television. It was her only connection to the world she had lost. The morning news was on. The banner at the bottom of the screen flashed in urgent red. Breaking news, sky-high sabotage, Fiverr dink. Brenda's breath hitched. She sat up, touching the remote. The screen cut to a live shot of the Federal District Courthouse in Manhattan. It was a chaotic scene. Dozens of cameramen were jockeying for position. Police barricades were holding back a jeering crowd, and the rain was coming down in sheets. "We are awaiting the exit of Arthur Henderson," the reporter shouted over the noise of the crowd. "The disgraced former hedge fund manager has been inside for sentencing since 9 this morning." The heavy oak doors of the courthouse swung open. Brenda leaned forward, her eyes wide. Arthur Henderson emerged. But the man on the screen bore no resemblance to the titan of industry who had sat in seat 2B, sipping scotch and sneering at a teenager. This man was a shell. He was handcuffed, shuffling forward in an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. His head was shaved, stripping him of the dignified silver hair he had been so proud of. He looked small, terrified. The crowd erupted. "Thief! Traitor!" Henderson flinched as if physically struck. He tried to hide his face from the cameras, ducking his head as the marshals guided him toward a waiting armored van. "The verdict is in," the news anchor's voiceover announced, grim and final. "Arthur Henderson has been found guilty on all 14 counts, including corporate espionage, cyber-terrorism, and reckless endangerment of a commercial aircraft. Judge Marlon Vance has handed down the maximum sentence, 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole." Brenda felt a cold stone settle in her stomach. 25 years. He would die in there. And for what? For a bet. For a stock short. But the camera didn't cut away after the van drove off. It panned back to the courthouse doors. The mood of the crowd shifted instantly. The jeering stopped, replaced by a murmur of awe and respect. 2 men walked out. One was Preston Sterling. He looked exactly the same as he had on the plane, imposing, calm, a force of nature in a charcoal trench coat. But he wasn't the center of attention today. He stepped to the side, acting as a guard, a mentor, clearing the way for the young man beside him. Caleb Washington. Brenda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Caleb looked magnificent. He had grown into his height. The slouch was gone. He wore a bespoke navy suit that fit him perfectly, a crisp white shirt and a tie the color of deep burgundy. He didn't look like a kid from Queens anymore. He looked like a king, but it wasn't just the clothes. It was his eyes. On the plane they had been filled with fear and confusion. Now they were sharp, intelligent, and fiercely kind. He walked with a purpose that vibrated through the screen. He stopped at the podium that had been set up at the bottom of the stairs. He didn't need notes. He looked out at the sea of reporters, the rain glistening on his shoulders, and he smiled. "Mr. Washington." A reporter from CNN yelled, "How do you feel about the sentence?" Caleb leaned into the microphone. His voice was deep, resonant, a voice that commanded the silence of the entire city. "Justice is a funny thing," Caleb said. "Sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's messy. But today the system worked. Arthur Henderson believed that his bank account gave him the right to gamble with human lives. He thought he could crash a plane to make a profit. He thought the people in that cabin were just numbers in a spreadsheet." Caleb paused, his gaze seeming to pierce through the camera lens straight into Brenda's living room. "He underestimated us. He underestimated the technology. And most of all, he underestimated the people he considered beneath him." Preston Sterling nodded in the background, a rare smile touching his lips. "Caleb," another reporter called out, "what's next for you? You're the youngest CTO in Fortune 500 history. Where does Sterling Aviation go from here?" Caleb's expression softened. He looked down for a moment, then back up, his eyes shining. "When I walked onto that plane 6 months ago," Caleb said, his voice lowering, becoming more intimate, "I was stopped at the door. I was told I didn't belong. I was told I was visual pollution because I was wearing a hoodie and had the wrong skin color for first class." Brenda flinched. The words, specific, cruel words, hung in the air like an accusation. "I almost turned around," Caleb continued. "I almost let them win. But I didn't, and I want to make sure no other kid ever feels like they have to turn around." He gestured to Preston. "That is why today we are launching the Flight Path Initiative. Sterling Aviation is committing $10 million annually to a new scholarship and mentorship program. We aren't looking for Ivy League graduates. We are looking for the kids in the public libraries, the kids coding on broken laptops in small apartments, the kids in hoodies." Caleb raised a fist, not in anger, but in solidarity. "We are going to find you. We are going to fund you. And we are going to fly you, because talent doesn't have a dress code. And the future? The future looks a lot like the people you try to keep off the plane." The crowd cheered. It was a roar of approval that washed over the scene. Caleb turned, shook Preston's hand, and the two of them walked toward a waiting limousine, black, sleek, and infinitely more expensive than the seat in 1A. Brenda stared at the screen until the image faded to a commercial for detergent. The silence in her apartment was heavier now. It pressed against her eardrums. She looked around at her peeling wallpaper, the stack of eviction notices, the gray rain streaking her window. She realized then that the tragedy wasn't that she had lost her job. The tragedy was that she had been standing next to greatness, standing next to a miracle, and she had been too blind, too hateful, too small to see it. She had tried to throw a king off the plane because she thought he was a pauper. Brenda Miller turned off the TV. She sat in the dark. The image of Caleb's triumphant smile burned into her retinas. The hard karma hadn't just hit her, it had left her behind. The world was taking off, soaring into a future led by Caleb Washington, and she was grounded permanently in the ruins of her own prejudice. This story isn't just about a plane ride. It's a reminder that you can never judge a book or a passenger by their cover. Caleb's journey from being profiled and humiliated to saving the very people who doubted him is a testament to the power of resilience and intelligence. We live in a world where people like Brenda and Mr. Anderson exist, people who will try to block your path because you don't fit their aesthetic. But remember, when you have the skills, the truth, and the integrity, no one can keep you in the back of the plane. If this story fired you up, if you believe in justice served cold and success served loud, then smash that like button right now. It helps us share more stories like this. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a dose of drama, karma, and real-life inspiration. What would you have done in Caleb's seat? Let me know in the comments below.